He's a little bit of my hero. You could go read about him on Wikipedia, but he's absolutely amazing. I've been close to 63 years in the Navy, probably as long as any officer ever. He is the father of our nuclear Navy. And if you read how he got there, it's amazing. He's a tough son of a gun. People didn't get along with him all the time because he tried to do the right thing and tried to be responsible. He's probably saved you billions of dollars. He did a lot of contracts with Electric Boat to make these submarines that Mr. Carr is going to talk about. Next slide, please. That's the USS Indiana. My wife and I were there. It was pushed out. We've had 4 ships named after Indiana. We're going to get a ship named after Evansville, hopefully in the near future. There have been previous ships named after Evansville, but this is USS Indiana. It's a Virginia class type of sub, and that one my wife and I went to. That was a commissioning. That was in I think September of 2018. That's at Cape Canaveral. Money was budgeted in 2008, so it's 10 years from assigned to Grumman to make that ship to its commissioning. That was the commissioning at that time. There's christening that happened about a year before. That's an attack sub, and those are a lot of the sailors that are on that, and they help us a lot. Next slide. Well, I missed my gold, back to back, two back to Hyman. Hyman got the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor. There's only 170 recipients. He received 2 gold medals. This guy is absolutely amazing. And what Tom Carr is going to talk to you about is our freedom. And the Cold War started. And if you look at World War II, I think Germany had close to 1,000 submarines. The United States had 250. That changed real quick after World War II. This guy was in the Academy in 1918, and if you think FDR was our Assistant Secretary of the Navy and learned a lot about war as Assistant Secretary of the Navy during World War I. So he got us through World War II, but this guy has helped a ton in the Cold War, and Tom will refer to him as well. Now, Tom Carr is a submarine man, and we haven't had any talks on submarines before, but I think they're a great deterrent. Nobody knows where they are under the water, and when Kennedy, when the things happened, that wasn't the Bay of the Pigs, it was the Cuban crisis. All of us remember the Cuban crisis. Well, some submarines say there were 6 subs under there, and they had a lot of missiles aimed at Moscow and Petersburg and other places, and I may be wrong on that, but that was a big deterrent to Khrushchev more than a lot of other things. So Tom, no further ado, Tom Carr.
Thanks, Mark. Tom Carr. Born and raised out of Louisiana. My grandmother's first cousin was in the Naval Academy in the 30s and became a submariner during World War II. And I listened to his stories. And I said, there's no way I'm not going into submarines. And I did. But I went in the 60s, and right out of high school. Enlisted December 6, 1966, and I stayed in until July of 75. I intended to make it a career, but in the middle of the 70s, at the end of my second hitch, I was a nuke, and commercial nuke, and was looking for Rickover's finest, and I was one of them. So we're going to talk a little bit about 100 years of submarines in a short period of time. We're going to talk about 40 or so years of the Cold War, a little longer. So after I left the Navy, I became a senior reactor operator at one of the biggest boiling water reactor plants in the country. And my last official act was I was on the Department of Energy think tank for what we could do to help Fukushima. And I'm now fully retired, thankfully. So, quick and dirty, I want to start off with a disclaimer that everything that I'm going to talk about today is not classified. I don't even own a Corvette. Everything we got for information basically comes out of blind man's blood, Jane's fighting ships, or the internet, except for a few personal items that I'm going to include after we understand a little bit more what we're talking about. The submarine is a mystic little thing that you heard about stealth. We invented it. It became real popular about the 90s, but we were doing it in the 40s. So with that, the other thing about the bit about this disclaimer was, you ever heard of Hunt for Red October and Tom Clancy wrote it? Yeah. There's some pretty interesting things in there, and the Submarines came to like that movie because of its accuracy. And the publisher of that said, "Can we publish this?" And they went and asked the FBI and said, "Can we do this?" And the FBI said, "There's some stuff in there that we think is classified." So next thing you know, Tom Clancy was in front of a congressional committee, and they asked him, "Where did you learn this stuff that you put in this book?" And he said, "Simple, it's in Jane's fighting ships at the library." And what I didn't find there, I went and asked the Russian embassy, and they told us. So now, everything we're going to talk about is not classified. Let's talk a little bit about the boats and the history. Let's go to submarine school and run that audio. This is how you get on board a boat. Tom Clancy's up next. That's the emergency blow we've hidden.
but it's going to pay off. One day out there in the ocean, one remote instance where a casualty goes down, with the training you've got, you might just be the guy that's going to be there when it starts. And with your training, you'll be able to jump right on that cabin. You'll be able to save your life and save your ship. Hi, what you're looking at here is a damaged strong flight trailer. One thing I want you to notice is a small confined area. We're going to put you down there, we're going to turn on the water, flooding, all right, do a good job, time, safety, is priority one. Make it happen.
Been there, done that, and it's cold. Welcome to the submarine force, children. When all else fails, you won't. Is that right? Let's talk a little bit about boats. By the way, the first boat, USS Holland, was sold to the Navy in April of 1900. So we're looking at a few years of history. We call them boats no matter how big they are because originally they were little teeny things that you put on a ship. They were too slow to go anywhere. The Holland, which is up in that far left-hand corner, that little teeny tiny speck, all right, had a crew of 6 men. There wasn't berthing. There wasn't a mess deck. There was no galley. There wasn't even a head. They were expected to get in, go out, fire their single torpedo, would come back and put back on. The difference between a ship and a boat is that you can put a boat on a ship, but you can't put a ship on a boat. Got that? So by tradition, all the way back to 1900, submarines are referred to as boats, no matter how big they are. Okay? We take a work our way down through here, we see these are kind of off the scale, but initially they were just, the class and the number. So it was like an L4. They didn't have names. An S-43, S-class 43rd boat in the class. And matter of fact, that first cousin of my grandmother's was the commanding officer of an S-boat during World War II. He then later took command of the USS Bakuna, which is the plastic World War II Gato/Bolero class that I've got out here on the table. Okay, so that falls in, and about the next thing that happens is we came up into the 50s, and this is where the Cold War was starting to get interesting, and we came up with the Nautilus, the nuclear power plant to run a submarine. Submarines up to this point were surface ships that could submerge. With the Nautilus, they became submersibles that could surface. Now, I'm going to let that sink in a minute. Somewhere on the fleet boats of World War II, the Bakuna, the Gato class and so on, they finally had, thanks to the Fairbanks Morris engine that was designed for a locomotive, they finally had enough power to run with the fleet at 20 knots. So they started calling them fleet boats. But when they submerged, they couldn't stay with the fleet anymore. Maximum speed submerged about 8 knots. Now we go to the nukes and we find out we can go faster underwater than we can on the surface. And there's an interesting one in here. I got to walk up to it. The Albacore. The Albacore was a submarine that was a research vessel. They weren't sure it was going to work. So they didn't bother to put a nuclear power plant in it or torpedo tubes. They just said, oh, well, all of our research says that this will run in the water better. And since it doesn't have to come up to the surface, we don't need that traditional cutter bow that you saw on the Nautilus. The Nautilus was a cutter bow flat deck submarine that would look just exactly like a fleet boat of World War II until you get into the engineering. So the Albacore went out and they found out this thing will go faster underwater than it will on the surface. And that's when the entire concept of submarines shifted. Now they really became submersibles. Today they make their own air out of seawater. They make their own water out of seawater. Their only limitation is how much food can they carry for the crew. So they get out there and go and, personally I've got over a year underway underwater. No big deal. It wasn't all connected, thankfully. But we'll move on. But the concept of the change in this design is huge. Let's see where we're at. To the next slide. Quick and dirty, really in the Cold War, our boats were all diesel boats. And we'll talk real quick about diesels. You have got a diesel engine just running a generator back here off the diesel. And that's charging a battery, and on the surface, that's sending power straight to the drive motors. The diesel was not connected to the prop. It was sending water or power to the drive motors and the battery. But when you went and submerged, you had to turn the diesel off. Because, believe me, that diesel, as huge as it is, and by the way, the diesel boats of the Gato class and Vallejo class had 4 of those things on board. 2 major huge batteries, right, and 2 drive motors. So we're looking at a machine that could literally draw a vacuum in a submarine faster than you can say draw a vacuum in a submarine. There was one boat that had, I remember, by the way, I spent 2 years at Submarines shore duty assignment, and we, in the early 70s, we still had smoke boats tied up alongside. And there was one that was fumigated, and they decided that they needed to get that out of the boat after the poisonous atmosphere had done its job on all the boats. And they said, well, we'll just send somebody down in scuba, and we'll turn on the diesel, and that'll draw the air right there. So they did. And then the idiot that came out made the mistake of closing the hatch. And then they can't open the hatch. In a matter of a second or less, there was such a vacuum in there, the hatch couldn't be opened. So sucked it down. So what they ended up having to do was wait until the diesel shut down on lack of air, and then they drill holes in the hull to break that. No, this is not something you do lightly. And the process to dive, you better make sure your diesel is shut down before you start. So that's what diesel electric is all about. So my next slide is, let's go on to a 2-week nuke. Okay, the nukes, in my generation, you had a reactor. It's over here. And it had a primary loop. It's got a pump and what's called a steam generator. The steam generator is in the primary loop, and on the tube side, you have the primary coin. Right? On the shell side of that heat exchanger, you have the secondary. We send the heat to the secondary side of the steam generator, make steam, send it down to the turbine, we condense it, send it back to the steam generator. So what we have is a dirty loop of contaminated water that's very small, in a small little compartment. And then we have the bigger secondary loop, which is all clean. So that's the reason that we were very capable of staying underwater with something as evil as a nuclear reactor in your back pocket. Okay? But the problem is that the propeller on a submarine runs real efficient, slow speed. Steam turbines run real efficient, fast speed. So between the two, you have to put this thing in here called a reduction gear. And the first thing you have to understand about submarines and not being detected is that if it moves, it makes noise. And if it makes noise, you're going to be banned. So we have to make it quiet. Well, we got pretty good. The big deal that put us ahead on this was the Russians didn't care. They said, we want to make it fast. So a Russian submarine made so much noise that they didn't, we could be pretty loud, and they couldn't hear us over the noise they made. We could pick up and did under one particular patrol. They say it was a Cold War. When the captain is in sonar in his underwear and you're in battle stations, and this is not a drill, it's not that cold. Okay? Cold War wasn't all as cold as you think. So, yeah, we stayed quiet. And by the way, that was the November class that we were shaking, and it was like 35, 40 miles away. So we knew where he was because he was so darn loud. Okay, so that's a two-loop loop. All right? The primary loop, the secondary loop, and the steam generator. Now, we go to something a little more modern. All right? And we start off with that upper is basically a configuration of the skipjack class nuke submarine. All right? We have a bow compartment at the front, torpedo room, in the middle with all the various elements up in here. That's what we call the operations area. And that's where you're going to find things like the control room and the radio room and the sonar room, and there'll be the mess decks and the galley, the berthing, and so on. That's all going on in the operations area. Next compartment. Back after that is the reactor compartment, and then two compartments behind that would be your machinery space and your engine room. So that's your average skipjack class attack submarine. By the way, we named ships at that time, they were all attack submarine. There was no concept of anything other than it's going to be, its job is a hunter killer. Now that changed with this advent of a submarine called the George Washington 598, which is the next one down. Basically, if you look closely, you'll see that they cut the boat right at the front bulkhead of the reactor compartment, stretched it 150 foot, and said, let's put some missiles in there. And that's what the bottom represents. Okay? The George Washington, there was a document they did in '56, which was done by Winslow Research. And that basically, in 1956, with the knowledge of the Nautilus, we told that, what do we do to really protect us? What's the best defense for the nation in the way of submarines and underwater? And Woodshull came up with this concept of a submarine sub-launch ballistic missile. In 1956, they were talking technology that does not exist in 1956. But 5 years later, it did. They said, this is great. So one team went out and said, let's figure out how to launch a missile from underwater. And another team said, let's build a boat to do that with. So they said, well, what are we going to do? Well, take a nuke. What do you got? Well, when you put down a new boat, the first thing you do is lay the keel. And the first thing you do when you lay the keel, it's a big celebration ceremony, you arc weld the name of the boat into the keel. That's just standard celebration, what we do. Well, they said, well, what do we got? Well, we're building this one right here. It's skipjack class. They said, great. Cut it right here. Stretch it 150 foot and put it in the boat. So they did. The name on the keel of the USS George Washington is the USS Scorpion. They later made another one, skipjack class, to make for the one that they just gave up to the Washington. But the Scorpion's actual first keel became George Washington. So the way we launch missiles is complicated and it's beyond the scope of this course, but we can do it. And it's a rather interesting effect. You can actually shoot that missile out from a stationary platform and the missile never gets wet. Now, as the pressure going, you pressurize the tube to oversea pressure by a little bit. All right? And there's a dome over the top of the missile. And when you launch, there's a gas generator underneath. So this is kind of like the old soda straw. Right? Away it goes. And as it starts to leave, patch cord in that dome, right, blows away so that dome gets out of the way of the bird coming up. That bird, anybody ever blow up a balloon under and put it underwater? It gets little, and when they let it go, it gets big as it goes up. The same thing happens. That missile was shot in an atmosphere of pressurized, and as it goes up, right, the pressure gets reduced, so the thing gets vented and vented and vented. So it's in an air bubble all the way to the surface. And it continues to the surface until it clears the surface, and this little accelerometer goes, I'm not going up anymore. And as soon as that thing pauses, that's when the solid rocket motors take over. They will take it from here. The technology that they were talking about that they had to invent, and they came up with the idea in '56, they were wanting to go to this today with that technology in the steering wheel. The solid rocket propellant that they came up with now fires the airbag in your car. The solid rocket boosters on the side of the space shuttle. Right here. There's a whole other story about the space shuttle I don't have time for. But it basically relates to the most advanced thing that we ever flew back to the back end of the horse. And we have more time later, I'll tell you how that works. Anyway, so that's how we went from an attack to a boomer, all right, and where missile boats came to be. Missile boats, like I said, got to be known as boomers. Let's move on to the next slide. Every time we left Hollyoak, and that's where I operated mostly out of, either a submarine base in London or Hollyoak, Scotland. Hollyoak, Scotland was, in the early days of the boomer, the Washington class, the range of the missile was so short that if they were operating out of the United States, they couldn't hit their targets until they got way across. So we developed a submarine base in Scotland. We call it Hollyoak. The Navy called it Refit Site 1. And at Refit Site 1, you were within range of all your targets. So every time we left Hollyoak via the River Clyde and out to the Irish Sea and then the North Sea, etc., we had to pass this guy. And you may have heard of the Russian trawler. Supposedly it's a fishing trawler. We refer to it as an AGI, that stands for Auxiliary General Intelligence, and their job was to monitor, try to figure out who's going, who's coming. We built all of the boats of the same exact class, the same port, painted them all exactly the same. So that in a patrol cycle, you'd be having a boat going out for patrol, one coming back from patrol, one going out for sea trials, one coming back for sea trials, and they all looked exactly the same, and they didn't have their numbers, they didn't have their names, so we figured we were fooling the trawler. We found out different later. But this wants to explain how cold the Cold War actually was, because this is a picture of an AGI Russian trawler after the Cold War in dry dock. Go to the next line. That's the same trawler, better view. Take a look down below. That's a sonar dome, and that's a torpedo tube. They were fully capable of gunning us down on our way out. One of my favorite memories of passing an AGI in the Irish Sea. Of course, they're in international waters, so it's good for them to be there. But we had a thing on board the boat, when you flushed the toilet, it went to a tank. And when the tank got full, you put air pressure on it and you blew the tank. We called the tank sanitary. We're on a surface transit. We've got to get to the 30, what they call the 50 fathom curve. When your boat is 425 feet long, you don't dive in less than 300 feet of water. Because you put your nose in the bottom and they find that down. So, we got to transit on the surface to the 50 fathom curve down. We transit past the AGI, and all of a sudden he fires up and he starts following us. And one of the lookouts goes to the captain, who's up on the bridge, of course, and he says, the trawler behind us, they're drawing samples in our wake. And they were, throwing bottles over and collecting samples. I said, what do we do? Captain didn't know he exists. Blow cemeteries, let them sample that. I love my king. Great guy. All right, let's move on. Next slide. So you can see the Cold War wasn't all that cold. All right. Let's go a little more modern. About the time I got out of the Navy in '75, a whole new class was coming out. All right. That Gato class that's up here, actually Gato, that's about 120 feet shorter than the 425 feet of my Lafayette class. Yeah. And that thing displaced 2,400 tons submerged, and we displaced 8,000 tons submerged. And we thought that was a pretty big boat. Then about 75, as I was getting out, they had this new boat, a new design now, that became the Los Angeles for the attack, and the Ohio class for the boomers. And what we have here is, again, a two-loop primary and secondary nuke reactor configuration. But now our steam goes to the turbine that's running a generator. Well, we have generators too, but we also have propulsion turbines. Now we don't have propulsion turbines. We just run to a generator. The generator then sends electrical power to a big electric motor. We removed reduction units, and the Los Angeles boat got real quiet. And then the Ohio did the same thing. So the Los Angeles class was a stepping stone to what we now refer to as the Ohio class. And if you want to talk about big, if you thought 425 foot long and 8,000 tons was big, let's take a look at 560. We'll have it, but yeah, hold that for a second. With 560 feet long and 18,000 tons, the Ohio is a big beast. So during my time, the missile boats were named after patriots, and we called them the 41 for Freedom. That's sword patch on my jacket. And the attack boats were named after fish. But now all of a sudden the attack boats are named after cities, and the boomers are now named after states. We thought that was going to simplify things. It didn't, because it got crazy. Somewhere then they said, okay, then we're going to come up with the next class. After that was the Seawolf class. And they changed the numbering system. Before it was a numerical configuration of the 636, so the 636 was 636th submarine ever, commissioned in the Navy. Now all of a sudden, the Seawolf is the 21, because it's the 21st century. And to tell you how screwed up everything is and throwing tradition out, it's a Seawolf. And it's named after a fish. Great. But there's two more boats in that class. And the other one's the Connecticut, and the Jimmy Carter. And by the way, all three boats are not alike at all. They're different in size, but they're all in the same class. So it started to get crazy. And then it got crazier with the advent of the Virginia class. Because the Virginia class was taking basically the concept of the LA class, making it smaller in diameter, but they gave it the name of a state, and it's a attack boat. So I don't know what we're doing now. And it just kind of crazy. So, I kind of want to cap this with a story that is not going to be found in Blind Man's Bluff or in Jane's Fighting Ships. Because about 2003, I invented this reunion class for my qualification book. And about 07, I got an email from a young lady. And she said, my dad's in town, I want to talk to you. Uh-huh. I said, where's town? She said, New York. I said, I'm a long way from New York. But I happen to know my old commanding officer happened to be in New Haven. With that, I want to roll a 8-minute little video here, and hopefully we can get enough volume on it. By the way, I am going to be the voice here narrating this.
Come up here and help me with volume. Come on up here.
If you want, I got another little story that while you get that together. All right, here we go. We can't get it. That's too weak. That's too weak. I'll tell the story. Shut it down. Yeah, we can, yes. Now what's going to happen? The bigger deal is what's going to happen at the end of this little video is we have the young lady that called me was Anya Azariela. She was with the United Nations, and her dad had been a Cold War submariner for the Soviet Union. And she wanted to talk to somebody that was on the USS Nathaniel Greene in October of '74. And I was on the Greene in '74. And so was Captain Gentry. And I put those two together. They met in New Haven. At which point we found out a lot of things we did not know. He was a junior officer on board a Victor-class Soviet. The picture over there, Captain Gentry next to him. Captain Gentry in yellow. They were laying in wait in the shallows of the Irish Sea when we left port out of Horlock down the River Clyde into the Irish Sea. They pulled up underneath us while we were on surface transit. Remember, we have to go out to the 50 fathom curve before we can dive. Well, they already dove. They came in shallow. So they basically positioned themselves under our rudder and trail us until we go. We have a procedure for everything, and one of them is rig for dive. And on rig for dive, there is nothing in that procedure that says contact the Soviet submarine under your rudder and tell them you're going to dive. We didn't. Caught them off guard, and we put the bottom of our rudder under their nose. They have an acoustic rubber coating. We ripped that off of them. They panicked and hit the switches, lost depth control. According to Benjamin, they damn near bounced off the bottom of the Irish Sea before they got control of the boat. There was no big encounter. We didn't even know it happened until they told us in 2007 that in '74 it happened. But here's the thing that tears me up. He knew who we are, where we are, when we were. He had all of the details. And we carried Captain Gentry. It took me 8 years after I developed the Reunion Association to stop calling him Captain for a first name. Carrie and I sat down and said, how did he know? Because he wouldn't tell us. Then we started putting some other facts together. Did anybody hear of Jonathan Walker? I'm not talking Scotch. Jonathan Walker By the way, Johnny Walker is not allowed in any of our reunions. And here's why. John Walker was a communications technician, warrant officer. In 1967, at the Pentagon, handling all the orders and codes for the submarine fleet, for our crypto communications, started selling codes to the Russians. That alone probably shouldn't scare you, because it's like software and hardware. The code won't work unless you have the hardware. You gotta put the code into the hardware for it to interpret what's coming in and be decoded. But they didn't have the hardware. They just had the codes. Anybody ever heard of the USS Pueblo? January 1968, less than 6 months after Jonathan Walker started selling codes to the Russians, the North Koreans seized the Pueblo in international water and declared it was not in international water and then took it. The guys on the Pueblo had enough time to destroy the codes, but they didn't have enough time to destroy the hardware. Anybody putting this together? They were reading our orders before we were. They knew exactly what boat was leaving what time. And this continued until 1985. In 1985, his ex-wife went to the FBI and said, you know, my husband's got a lot of money from selling codes to the Russians. And they went, yeah, sure. The FBI couldn't find her but with 2 hands and a flashlight. They just said, oh, it's disgruntled wife, ex-wife, she's just upset. And they blew it off. About 6 months after that, NCIS, Leroy Jethro Gibbs, he got word that the FBI knew about this and went, So they had Proby looking into his records and found out this guy had a lot of money for a warrant officer. And they busted him. They sent him to prison. He died in prison. And on the night he died, every Southerner that I know of raised a glass and wished him to rot in a location that we won't discuss. Okay? Because that man tried to kill us. But as a result, once we found out what we found out after 85, we now understood why they went to, all their submarines went to the Arctic. They were hiding in the ice. And the reason was that we were hard to find them in the ice. But you can surface a submarine through ice and still launch. So as a result of what Jonathan Walker did in the early 80s, the Russians figured out what was going on. And they went and hid and played the thing completely different. So the Cold War wasn't that cold. I'm going to open it up for questions. I could go on for a long time. When Mark said, do you think you could do 45 minutes? Sure, we can do that in sea stories. So, any questions? By the way, the standard answer, before you ask any question, the standard answer to any submarine question is the same answer. Second answer is 2 down. Okay? How many men are on board? 2 down. How deep will it go? 2 down. How long to patrol? 2 down, 1. Same answer. So, give me a question I can't answer without 2 down.
My name is John Brown. I was on mine sweepers when the Scorpion went down. We found the Scorpion off of Azores. Can you touch on what happened with the Scorpion? I was an electronics technician, so I had to stand radio watches on them mine sweepers. There's only 50 of us. And I saw pictures of the Scorpion laying on the seabed. Rumor was that they were playing games with Russia. And supposedly 4 days after the Scorpion went down, a Russian frigate in their northernmost port went into dry dock with their bow tore up, which gave credit to that they cut her in half. She's laying at 90 degrees. One survivor of that crew, we were tied into Naples, Italy. The boomers don't surface, but the boomer came in the harbor. A motor whaleboat from the tender went out and they loaded a person on the motor whaleboat, brought him back to the tender, put him in an aircraft, sent him to Holylock, Scotland. He had spinal meningitis. They had to get him off that boat. And I think it was a week later when she went down, but it wasn't very long. Can you touch on the Scorpion?
I'd be glad to. Yeah, Scorpion is a tragedy. And all of us in the dolphin rearing community, by the way, the insignia I have is submarine dolphins, and you get those for qualification. I'll talk about Scorpion. First of all, the gentleman that was removed from the Scorpion, that was what we referred to as a medevac, okay? And I don't have any details on that. I do know that the Scorpion, I've seen pictures of it laying on the bottom. It was definitely an implosion, all right? Can we put that slide up of the attack the boomer? You don't want that, that's my speed. That's my outline that I'm going to follow with. What it amounts to is that I mentioned where the reactor compartment was, and then we have that tapering tail. Right forward is the right circular cylinder of a cone. Right, the back end's an injuring cone, and then the operations area is the right circular cylinder. Okay, we're going to need to bear on that. But what it amounts to is that the only way that something like this, the entire engineering cone was rammed into the operations compartment. That means that there was a massive decompression. We have seen acoustics of the event, and there was a couple of small pops followed by a big boom, and so on. And I have seen the acoustic layout of that. All we have is conjecture, because right here we have basically the skipjack / Scorpion right here. So right at this point here, all right, this entire section here is jammed into this forward section. All right. The sail, which is that area that stands above, right, was knocked off and is sitting separate. But the big killer on this is that the hatches in the torpedo room were blown open. So there was a big explosion that we think was a torpedo cook-off. And if the torpedo exploded from inside the boat, it would have breached that hull, all right, at the torpedo room, and that would have provided, and if they had their watertight integrity, which means the other doors were closed, they would have been faulted, but not open. But the explosion of the torpedo would have caused forward flooding. It would have caused the submarine to sink out. They already run at a maximum depth, usually to stay distant, unobservable. And the belief is that the concussion of the explosion basically killed everybody on board instantly. And that without any kind of control and heavy flooding forward, the boat exceeded crush depth and imploded. But that is conjecture. 99 men on board Scorpion are the only ones that will ever know what happened to the Scorpion. Now, the thresher's another story. I have great details on the thresher, because it was in communication all the way up to the loss. And what we changed as a result of the loss of the thresher was huge. And it basically established 129 souls were lost on the thresher. I'm alive today because of what we changed as a result of what we learned from that. And I appreciate that. Any other questions? Did that answer your question the best I can? Sorry, thank you.
Don Johnson, is there a museum in Texas, Rickover Museum, about submarines?
If there is in Texas, I don't know.
Okay.
The number one spot for a submarine museum on the planet is in Groton, Connecticut, outside the front gate of Submarine Base New London.
And there's one in Galveston as well. But I thought Rickover had a museum of his own somewhere, but I'm mistaken.
I don't know that.
Thank you.
I only met the man once in my career.
I'm David Coker.
Stand up.
Two things. First of all, did those electric motors on the nuclear boats have coolant systems? And then the second thing, can you tell us anything about the USS Kursk?
I'll take the second question first. The Kursk was not USS.
I know,
She was a Russian boat.
I know.
Yeah. We talked about the Scorpion lost to a torpedo explosion. We think that. We know the Kursk was lost to a torpedo explosion. All right? When you get a hot run like that, yeah, you got a problem. And if you look at what they had, what they brought up, it was definitely a torpedo put up.
I saw a Canadian-produced documentary. I have it at home on DVD. And that story has never been told to the American public. But what that boat was carrying was a top secret, super fast torpedo that the Russians were developing, and our people were afraid that they were on the verge of selling them to the Chinese.
They probably already had.
They probably already had, but it was a test. They had sent this ship out for a test for this, and apparently they had Chinese observers on board, I think.
What we didn't get from the little video I had from Captain Etheria was a section that I edited out for this display because we had honored him. We do a bell tolling ceremony at every reunion. Never gotten through it with a dry eye, and I'm probably not going to get through it talking about it now. But we toll the bell 8 times for remembrance of a lost. 8 bells at the end of the watch. That's why we do 8. But because we've done that for that reunion, and because not too long before that reunion where Benjamin was there as our keynote speaker, they had lost the Kursk. And a friend of mine, Tommy Cox, yeah, I'm kidding. All right. We had people on board called spooks. A spook is a guy that you can see, but he's not there. Okay? The guys that were up and Tommy Cox was a friend of mine, and he was a spook, and he's the only guy I knew that spoke fluent Russian. So I asked him to decipher what Benjamin was saying. Benjamin only knows 2 words of English. Thank you. Okay, that's it. So everything had to go through an interpreter. I'm wondering how accurate. So quite. Anyway, so yeah, Benjamin was very upset. And the reason I had to edit that out was he has to return to Russia and live there. And he was not kind to the people he politically worked for. When that was first. Because he knew that there were people alive on the Kursk that could have been saved and weren't because of the pride of whoever that would not allow that to happen. All right, your first question about cooling of electric motors, yes. They are not cooled by water. Our generators were, all right, for the heat exchanger, but they were basically air movers. Any questions that answer your question on motors? Go.
My name is Rhonda. I guess you want me to stand up probably. But anyway, my question is, what is the physiological effect on the body of being on a ship for a year or whatever, or a submarine?
Physiological, nothing. Psychological, huge.
So you don't have to have the bends, or you don't have like the physical effects of the difference between the barometric pressure and all that kind of stuff?
The pressure inside the boat is where you're at right now.
Okay.
The pressure that we're talking about that the boat's experiencing is outside the boat. However, we did go through pressure transients because everything that was on board was air operated, and we vented back inboard. So eventually your air banks would get depleted and your air pressure would go up a little bit. It's kind of like, a high pressure area. And then when that happens, what we do is fire up the compressors and take the air out of the boat and put it back in the air bank. So it was just constant cycling. But the reason that was funny, we used to fly the, by the way, I didn't mention it, that the boomers had 2 crews, complete, captain to cook. And every 105 days we'd swap. Keeping the missiles pointed at Moscow was paramount. So we couldn't have a lot of downtime. The boat came in, changed crews, got fixed up, went out, went to home. I found it funny that the stewardesses on the flights would be handing out chewing gum, not understanding that we sleep through bigger air pressure transients in those airplanes that we're going to go through. So, psychological, now that's another story. I didn't expound on qualification to get your dolphins, but the day I went through 2 years of school before I got to a boat. And I was a big man on campus. And I got to the boat and I was the lowest form of life on the planet. I was a non-qualified puke. And every day I was getting kicked in the crotch. Because you see, you got to go learn every system, every watch station, every damage control, every emergency air breathing manifold, every bit of that boat. And then you can't be trusted until you're qualified. And when you're qualified, that's when you get the dolphins. Dolphins are not a participation trophy. You don't show up and say, here's the dolphin. You got to earn them. And if you don't earn them in 9 months, we'll find you a job on a surface ship. You get 3 to 6 months, basically. Question?
Yeah. Deborah Switzer. What I wanted to know was, did we ever have any Russians defect to the United States, who were on submarines?
I hope so. They don't check in on me with me on that. No, I can't tell you one way or another, and neither confirm nor deny. We know a lot about their boats. I talked about Tommy Cox, a friend of mine. He was a spook on board of the La Palma, and one of the favorite memories or stories that he ever told. This, by the way, it's a sea story. The difference between a sea story and a fairy tales start off once upon a time, and sea stories say, listen up, fellas, this ain't no crap. Okay, other than that, it's kind of blurred between the two, but one of my favorites was, we had a thing called SOSUS. We still have it. Basically, we put underwater microphones everywhere in the ocean. And anything that moves out there, we hear it. In today's technology, I understand that a ship leaving the English Channel can detect cargo ship leaving New York Harbor on today's systems. So SOSUS, whenever something came out of Murmansk and moved down the pipe or out of Vladivostok, that's easy to say, we knew they were coming. And everything that makes a noise, makes a specific noise, what we call a noise signature. So we can put that noise that we hear into a computer and it'll go, oh, that's this class of boat. A new one popped up. They'd never heard it before. And we thought, well, how fast is a big boat? And they came rolling out of Wyoming, a monster that's bigger than an Ohio class. And it's called the Typhoon. And the LaPlante was the first attack boat. It was assigned to pick it up as she broke into open water. And he pulled that thing right up underneath that typhoon and spent 1 month there. Tommy told me about it. It was incredible. They were periscope photography. They were taking pictures of this boat. The typhoon never knew they were there, but the LaPlante was a sturgeon glass and quiet for its day. And he said it got to be so standard that they had nicknames for the guys that were diving and steering the boat. And it's like, okay, Eagle is on the helm today, right? Because they had specific methodology. That's as close as I can tell you that we got to figuring out what they had that I know of. And
We got several questions for you. Number one, you did talk about electromagnetic field when the subs come back. Can you tell them about that? The magnetic field on the submarine, when they come into bait, they change their magnetic configuration.
that's news to me.
Okay, maybe I'm
Now,
wrong.
surface ships have degaussing, all right?
Maybe that's what it is.
That the surface ships have I was an electrician and they tried to teach us that. They have coils in the ship that can, what they call degauss or cancel the magnetic signature of the boat. We didn't have that on board submarine. Our job was go down and stay down.
Second question, in our World War I room, which I'd like all you to see, it's been changed, and also the gallery with the Red Cross room's been changed, and when you walk right through that gallery, it's been updated, you ought to look at it. But on the wall there, it talks about the Lusitania. It was a sub, I think it was sub number 20. The U-boat had hit and killed 1,000 people, and that was in prior to World War I. Can you talk about World War I subs briefly and World War II subs, and why in World War II the Germans had 1,000 subs and we only had 250, and why we were so behind the Germans for a long period of time? World War I and World War II.
Yeah, World War I, the submarines were literally boats, and they little boats, all right, barely could get. So let's just say they weren't fast enough to chase anything on the surface. Whatever out there had to stumble in front of them, and the Lusitania did that. The torpedoes that they were using were very far advanced, and in World War II, the German boats were actually superior to ours. So I can't talk at length on the World War I, but I can a little bit on World War II. The Germans used something called a schnorkel, which we later adopted, but not until after the war. We didn't know it existed. A schnorkel was a way that you could be down to periscope depth and put this up and draw air in and run your diesels while they're submerged. We never thought of that. And we thought, well, you have to have the hatches open and be on surface. They were ahead of us on that. But the taking of U-505, anybody been to Chicago? Smart. Okay, the rest of you, those that have been, I'm sorry, the rest of you are real smart. But if you ever get to Chicago, the Field Museum has got U-505, which is an absolutely incredible piece of, we stole the submarine from the Germans. And we didn't want anybody to know that we did it. The big deal was that we talked about software and hardware on decoding. They had a thing called Enigma, and they were able to communicate using these codes, and we were having a hard time breaking, and we needed one of these Enigma machines, so they basically stole the submarine, U-505, and the way they did it was it's called hold down. We won't let them up, okay? And when they finally have to come up because they can't hold their breath any longer, then you can attack them on the surface. And they tried to scuttle it and abandon ship. The brave crew went on board and secured the flooding then on this. I mean, it's like, do you know anything about that airplane over there? Get it in the seat and fly it. that's what we're talking about. Go get in this submarine you don't know anything about and stop it from floating. Really. Anyway, they did. And then they said they would have been real easy to tow it, like to a closer location. But if they did that, the Germans would never have it. So they towed it all the way across the Atlantic as a double top secret. You know, the idea that the Germans would have known that we got their codes and their equipment would have been devastating. They'd have changed it all. So, there you go.
There's a movie out on that, I believe, that Make No Effect. It's a movie on discovering that.
U-571, it's in my book.
Second, or a couple other things. William Browning is my first cousin, and he is stationed, he's in his private company, but he's applied mathematician, went to Purdue University, was a professor there, and he's been figuring out the trajectory of both the torpedoes and the missiles for the last 43 years, or 45 years. He's been stationed there, been there that amount of time. But if you ask him a question, he can't answer anything. So you ask him, I can't say. So Tom said, I couldn't have that guy come talk because he can't say anything. Because everything's top secret. He won't talk about anything. And he'll tell a story about the loose ships, sink ships, and that happened in World War II. But the other thing, I was stationed in Groton for about a month. It was in February of '77 when the snowstorm happened. I drove all the way there against lots of advice. And I got there, and I only knew a white uniform in the Navy. Everybody had a black uniform. And I looked like the ice cream man, you know. And so they laughed at me, and they called me a bad word, ensign, all the time. And I like to swim, so they had one of those things he was showing there. It's a great big water tower, and they flood it with water. And they put you in the bottom, and so you have to get up and not inhale. You're supposed to exhale so you don't blow, you get an air embolus. So I was ready to get in this, and all of a sudden the commanding officer said, get that guy out of there. They'd spent 4 years on my medical education, and if I would have panicked, they wouldn't have had a doctor anymore, and they would have had to explain the cost to my education. So that was part of that experience. When I got there at 2 in the morning. I had a bunch of books, and I parked in a parking place. And it was about 2 months. I was sitting there and moving my books in the whatever. At that time, I read a little bit. And about 3 in the morning, some guy came in my room. He said, "You're in my parking place." Well, usually I'd smart off with somebody, but for some reason I said, "I'm sorry." But he didn't see a bunch of beer bottles. He saw books, so he left me alone, I think. And so then, about 3 days later, I had to meet the commanding officer. And that was the commanding officer. So when you shut up, it sometimes helps.
That comment about loose lips sink ships, that really rings close to home. My standard response to anybody that wants to take me for my services, it technically never happened because I never was where I was and I didn't do what I did, so there's no need to thank me for something that never happened. But the term SS has been associated with the submarine service forever, and in World War II that changed. A Kentucky congressman was touring Pearl Harbor. Anybody hear what Nimitz said about the luck or God looking over? Or because he said that at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese made 3 of the biggest mistakes you could ever make. One, the entire Pacific oil reserve sat on the hill in above-ground tanks and nobody sprayed it. One plane sprayed those tanks and they would have lost at least 6 months to a year's worth of fuel for everything in the Pacific. All right, number 2, they hit us on Sunday. 9 out of 10 sailors were on the beach. Nobody on those boats. Or ships, sorry. That's a windshield. And then number 3 said they didn't touch any of the repair facilities. The dry docks were over there. Well, number 4, he didn't mention that day, but they didn't touch any of the submarines. Right? Had they hit the repair facilities, all those ships that they raised would have been towed to San Francisco for repair. Right? They just took it from across the bay and said, here, fix it. So that was a big deal. But the submarine service was not touched. So all those capital ships that were sank at Pearl Harbor on December 7th we didn't have anything to do with climate except the subs. And the subs, did you know that less than 0.5% of the United States Navy sank over 50% of the Japanese tonnage during World War II? Submarine service did. So, somewhere around 1943, we were kicking butt in the Pacific, and this Kentucky congressman's over doing a tour, and he said, how come we're doing so good? And some idiot said, man, goes, because the Japanese are stupid. They don't know you can go deeper. They're setting their depth charges too shallow. So being a good congressman, he goes back to all his constituents in a big, yeah. Of course we're going to win the war. Japanese are idiots. They're setting their depth charges too shallow. During World War II, we lost 52 boats. 1 month after that congressman made that comment public, we lost 10 of those 52 in 1 month. And Admiral Lockwood made a comment publicly that Congressman May can be happy to know that the Japanese are no longer setting their depth charges to check. Lose those 6 ships. That's the day the SS Fleet silent service. We just don't talk about it.
Okay, any other questions? Yes. Look, the microphone, please.
I'm Rhonda. You were talking about some of the ships or some of the submarines that were kind of like watcher submarines or what, like just kind of looking. We had a friend of ours that was out in submarine in Libyan area. Was that the same era as like, the end of the Cold War and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, if you're talking about Desert Storm and later, I know, but you're talking about Libya, etc. Basically, the Cold War ended with the close of the Soviet Union into individual states. So if you're talking about after 91.
No, I think it was before 91. I wouldn't swear to it. It was when
well, that time frame, the boats in question would have been Los Angeles and Ohio class. All right, most of the Sturgeon class have been taken down. They basically all the Permit class. By the way, the Permit was the second boat in the class. The first boat in that class was actually the Thresher, and you named the boat, the series for the first boat. So when the Thresher went down, the second boat came, so the Permit class. But yeah, at that time frame, when you were talking about Libya and such, that would have been more modern boats after my time frame. Like I said, I left in 75, but thanks to my discussions with a lot of, I'm staying current, okay?
it could have been mid-80s. It could have been as late as mid-80s.
Yeah.
A friend of ours' brother was there, and he talked about getting a 1 o'clock in the morning, this is not a warning, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
whoever it was must have backed off because they didn't end up fighting.
Yeah, there's a lot of close encounters that occur, okay, some of them closer than others. I don't have any details on that, but I can tell you that, like, the Iraq War, which opened up in 91-ish, right, with the assault on Baghdad, and everybody says, well, the stealth fighters were in first. Not really. Actually, the first people in boots on the ground were SEALs. They were delivered by submarines because they were providing guidance, ordnance, and communications back. And the actual first strikes were submarine-launched Tomahawks, cruise missiles that came in and took out most of the infrastructure that would have dealt with defending, all the air defense. So, yeah, it wasn't the stealth Air Force that came through first, it was the stealth Navy that came through first. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the Albacore is in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They're off of I-95.
Yes, it is.
Right there at the river. And on the Scorpion, were they having trouble with some electronic switches? I saw on a special that may have been what caused the explosion.
I have no idea the details, all right, that caused the demise of the Scorpion. But I heard that back in my day that they were of the belief that it was a battery explosion. And the battery is almost half the boat. It's huge. And being an electrician, guess what I have to do all the time? Either charge it or take gravities. And, you know. So, yeah, I don't have any details on anything related to that.
Okay, and on the thresher, was that the first or the second generation of
Thresher was, all right, it was the same engineering plant as was on the skipjack class, all right? It was the second generation of the Albacore design. You're right about the Albacore being in Portsmouth. We almost had a reunion up there, but that fell through. Called 2020 or something like that.
Yeah, I had a couple friends that were building subs at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, working on second generation.
My qualification boat, the Nathaniel Green, was built at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, and the Green was one of the finest boats ever made there, and the reason was she was being built when the Thresher was lost. And the workers at Portsmouth said, we're going to show everybody that it wasn't our fault that we lost it. All right? And they turned their attention to what was in front of them. And let me tell you, the Nathaniel Green was a Swiss watch. That was the most precise running, quietest boat of its type that we ever saw. Anybody else?
What chemistry did you use on the batteries?
Lead acid, standard stuff. Okay. They were just big. They were really big. One cell was about so tall, so by so, and we had like, I don't know, 125 of them. So, pretty big deal. A lot of fun. She asked how many men. It depends on the class. Okay? If you're looking at the boomer that I qualified on, you're looking at 140 per complement. If you're looking at today's Ohio class boomer, you're looking at about 160. Okay? It's bigger, but there's a lot more stuff in it. And where we were carrying 16 birds, the Ohio class is carrying 24. If you're talking about the attack boats, you're looking at the skipjack class carrying somewhere that's sitting at about 90 to 99. Thresher would have been carried, or permit class, and sturgeon class would have been carrying about 110. So it varies in size. Sure. Anything else?
Yes, go ahead. We got a guy over here, we got to find a microphone for him. While he's getting to the microphone, remember, Reagan built the ships here. He went up to 600 ships by 1989. We crushed Russians back at that time, and the Cold War stopped. Now we don't know who we're shooting at, because I think we got terrorists mostly, so it's changed. We don't know who to shoot at anymore. Go ahead, sir. Name?
Elton Mossberg. I was stationed at Schofield Barracks. Can you hear me now? I was stationed at Schofield Barracks. The Japs actually ran across Schofield and Marine Base on the other side, the old Fort Matt, and past Air Base before they went down here for a harbor. I don't know how many people realize that, but that's what really happened.
How many planes were there at Schofield and that air base? They missed all those that they could have gotten, I assume. Lots of planes, or do you know?
I really don't know. I just know that it was right next to our on the other side of the street. And when you said the fuel tank, that might be where the fuel tank were too.
Yeah, but they left them alone.
When it comes to Cold War, it was below the radar.
The Nimitz, the history of that is in December 7th, 1941. Chester Nimitz was at a Christmas party in Washington, D.C., and they got a phone call, and they said, it's for you. And then we started Franklin Delano Roosevelt saying, you're on your way to Ohio. And you are now the commander of the Pacific Fleet.
How long did it take you to get there?
And he got to Pearl Harbor on the 24th. They didn't have the aircraft traffic that we did. A train across country and a ship from probably San Francisco out to Pearl. So he didn't get there till the 24th of December.
Commander named Admiral named Kimmel. He's born in Henderson, and his statue's in the Henderson riverfront, and he was the admiral of the Pacific Fleet until Pearl Harbor happened. And he's the scapegoat, and he lost 2 stars. He went down from 4 to 2, and the family's tried to get the stars back, and they're not able to get the stars back. There's a nice bronze statue at the riverfront commemorating Admiral Kimmel, and that's who Nimitz replaced. This is, any other questions? This is underwater. Next week or 2 weeks, we're going to above water to the tank, and then we're going to go to learn about the signal corps from the Mr. Pitcher. So thank you for attending, and thank Tom Carr.